Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. We're just coming off a short break and we're ready to share more amazing conversations with incredible leaders. I wanted to give you a quick update before we start this episode. I am so grateful to Barbara Chow from the Heising-Simons Foundation. We had such a great conversation that we decided to make it a two-part episode. I hope you enjoy. I'm Lynette Fraga, the CEO of Child Care Aware of America, the nation's leading voice on childcare. Throughout this series, we discuss the essential role of our children, our families, and our community to catalyze a thriving society. So pull up a chair and let's get started. Barbara Chow is our guest today, and she is the Education Program Director at the Heising-Simons Foundation. Prior to joining the foundation, she served as the Education Program Director for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Barbara has also served as the Policy Director of the House Budget Committee and the Executive Director of the National Geographic Education Foundation. During the Clinton administration, she served as Deputy Director of the Domestic Policy Council, Associate Director for Education, Income Maintenance, and Labor Programs at the Office of Management and Budget, and Special Assistant to the President for White House Legislative Affairs. Barbara has a master's degree in public policy from the University of California, Berkeley. Barbara, welcome to A Seat at the Table.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So thrilled to have you. I am so ready to jump in. Never have enough time for really good conversations with amazing people. So I am ready to jump in and enjoy. So I just read this amazing resume of amazing things that you have done in and out of government. How did you decide that was something you wanted to go into? Did you know that right away that government was your thing at the outset?
That's a great question. I actually knew it for a pretty long time. So I as you said, I was a political science major in college. And then I actually spent one of my semesters, sort of abroad in Washington, D.C. on the Hill. And I really fell in love with it then. And I kind of stayed on that path from that moment on. I spent a year after college working for the state Senate here in California, and then went on to public policy school and just sort of went from there.
What was it about? A lot of people do talk about the fact that when they have exposure in the DC area and have an opportunity to work in policy, many of those who stick with it for years say, this was like my thing. It really stuck with me. What for you about both federal policy as well as state policy really inspired you and got you excited about policy as an area of practice for yourself?
I think that one of the things about kind of work on the Hill is it's very broad. So you get to work in many different areas. It's not just one, especially when you're new to it. Mm-hmm. So you get exposure to all sorts of different sectors, and it's moving very fast, and there's a lot of young people there. So, there's so many aspects of it, I think, from a social and a professional perspective that are kind of unique to that environment. That's what excited me about it early on.
So then you went back. So you were in DC, got that exposure, internship abroad program, and went back to California. And you shared that you then jumped into state policy and politics. So to share a little bit about what that was like working at the state level.
There's a fantastic program, actually, if any of your listeners are in California, that is directed specifically towards often people just out of college. Okay. It still exists even from the time that I was there. It's either state or you can work in the assembly. It's a fellowship program. You spend 1 year. And for me, I got to work for John Garamendi. He's now a congressman, but he was then a state senator. And I was working on healthcare, which was really interesting and fun. And John was such an interesting guy. When I think about what the through line of my life has been, my professional life, I would characterize it as I've always worked at the intersection of money and social change because I work mostly in budgets. And so my path to philanthropy, which is what I've been doing for the last 12 years, was really through that. And I spent nearly, most of my time in DC engaged in the budget process from lots of different vantages. I was, at OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, which I think can sound like a kind of I don't know, green eye shade accounting kind of place. People say work at OMB and a lot of people don't even know what that is, but I consider it my institutional home in many ways. I've returned to it multiple times in my career. It's this incredible institution, which is part of the executive office of the president. And it's responsible for the budget, also responsible for kind of coordinating legislative activity across the government. And it's the place where you really learn technical skills. You learn about performance metrics. It's a place where I think I really got a very strong basis in the analytic skills. It was the first job that I had in DC, and it was the place that I was sort of, the things that I learned then are things that I've returned to throughout my career.
Yeah. I just want to, I'm raising up because I think this is such an interesting comment that you made, is that your professional through line has been the intersection of money and social change. And the fact then that you were at OMB and you call it sort of this professional home for yourself for a while. Just curious about what that intersection has meant for you then, particularly as you're thinking about the work you do now in philanthropy. How has that been a element that you've held on to?
Well, so money can have a huge impact, was what I'd say, on social change, and government can have a huge impact. It can provide and guarantee healthcare. It can provide childcare subsidies. It can make sure that the cars we're driving in are safe and the food that we're eating is safe. And so I think I've seen many of the incredibly positive things that government at whatever level can bring.
Yeah.
Although I know it is, it's gotten much more critique. It can also wield power for in challenging ways. And so it's certainly not a perfect good. It's as good as the people that are running it or engaged in it. So it's that, I think that's sort of the entry point for me, was really seeing how the important role that it can play.
So, you share that, government, for example, is as good as the people that are engaged with it. So share with me a little bit, and share with our listeners a little bit about who were those people for you. You mentioned one that worked for in California, but who were those individuals along the way, from that student that was a political science major in your undergraduate program to those individuals who have inspired you along the way? What is it about them, or the stories you have about those individuals, that really helped you to see the art of the possible with engagement in either philanthropy or government?
So there's like a baseline, I would say. So the people that really had an influence on me were smart, analytic, and thoughtful, and they were committed to issues of social justice. But I would say that's kind of the baseline. What they also, in addition to all of those things, they just had enormous courage, because there's a lot of times I think in these kinds of roles where you can do something, you have an opportunity, I think, to do something which can be very hard to do. You can say things hard, you can tell truth to power, or you can withhold that. And the people that I've admired most have actually said the things they needed to say when they needed to say them. And that is something that I've kind of struggled with myself, I will say, but those are the people that I admired most.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, to that point, being able to see and to see the injustices is one thing, to acknowledge they live and exist, to be able to speak out against or for justice against injustice. That is a whole other story. And to take action does often take courage. Courage doesn't have to be an earthquake, right? And grand turbulence. It can often be small acts of courage. So just curious, are there pivotal moments for you in relationship with these individuals where you went, wow, that was something?
I think I don't know that there were single moments. I mean, I think it's more of the things that I observed over time.
Mhm.
So, I mean, and I would say if there's one piece of advice I would have as somebody who's, toward the end of her career,
Mhm.
it is this using your voice. It's something that I probably did not do as much as I feel now that I should have.
Mhm.
I would see things, there may be things that I disagreed with,
Mhm.
or people mistreated in ways that I may not have thought was the right thing to do. And I just wish I had said more at the time.
Mm.
And it's very hard to do that.
Mhm.
I think
Yes.
if you're a person of color, there's
Mhm.
a penalty that you pay, and it's dangerous. It feels very dangerous to do those things, which is sort of why I probably didn't.
Mhm.
But I also think a lot about that now, that you can't get the sort of change you want unless you say something. So there's that phrase from we've all heard so many times: if you see something, say something. That I kind of
Mhm.
feel like that may be um, the advice that probably the biggest piece of advice I would give to others who are earlier.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. And also acknowledging, number one, we're all stretching ourselves no matter our accomplishments, right? To say something when we see something, and also that there are cadres and cadres and cadres of individuals who are championing you to be able to do that, that we are here for each other, and lifting up and revealing injustices and raising up voices, et cetera. And I think that that certainly has encouraged me to see people around me that are supportive, as hard as it sometimes is. So now as you're, thinking more about your current work and where you are right now, and this idea, and again, so appreciate your advice about sort of stepping into courage, and your advice to younger individuals who may be just entering into the field. So if you were to describe yourself as a leader and entering into and supporting your teams, share a little bit about, like, how do you view yourself as a leader in this moment, particularly given where we are right now, so much happening in our early childhood arena. Barbara, what is leadership like for you right now? How is that showing up in your work and for your team?
I think I would describe myself as a lead from behind kind of a leader. So,
Mhm.
and by that I mean somebody who is. What I try to do is create the conditions so that my team can do their best work, both individually and also as a group. And I think that means that sometimes you need to step back from that, as opposed to step forward and kind of be the face of everything.
Mhm.
A small example of that is I'll rarely like provide my title. If I'm in a meeting and I'm with other folks, I kind of take a little pride if nobody knows exactly who's in charge. Because I think hierarchy can be really damaging in some
Mhm.
ways. So I try very hard to not impose that. And this idea of, like, how do you create these optimal conditions for people to be successful?
Mhm.
I thought about that a lot too over these years. It's not just something I say, it's something that I think about. And that is, there was a book, I don't know if you've heard of it, by a guy named Dan Pink.
Mm.
It was a book called Drive, and it was all
Mhm.
about intrinsic motivation and what drives people. So he did all sorts of research to try to understand that question. And he came up with three common attributes. One is autonomy, the second is mastery, and the third is purpose. And I
Mm.
think that just really spoke to me about what I would try to do, the things that drive me and the things that I'm
Mhm.
trying to do for others.
Mhm.
Is that autonomy piece, is being able to do, have kind of a free range of motion over a set of activities for which you are responsible. That
Mhm.
seems kind of obvious, but that I think is often undermined, especially for people earlier in their career.
Mhm.
Mastery, I think the idea there is just that we're always learning, and there's some things that are a little bit out of our reach, and there's some things that we really know well. And mastery, I think, is that process. Hopefully, you actually never achieve it fully, but you're on a journey
Sure.
to stretch yourselves a little bit, kind of on the edge. Mastery is really kind of a critical part of it, and then purpose. So that sense that you're part of something larger, you're trying to do something bigger than yourself.
Mhm.
Money actually doesn't drive people in the same way, but purpose does. And so I think all of those together are the conditions that create happy people and people that are driven to do their best work.
So, given that's beautiful, thank you so much. And now I've written down drive. I'm buying it now. I'm gonna have to look that up, Dan Pink. So, given that, you had mentioned earlier that your through line is this sort of intersection of money and social change. If we were to extend that to your purpose, how have you, for all of those in our audience that are really sort of imagining what the art of the possible might be in their professional journey, particularly in the area of early childhood or other areas in child and family serving professions, seeking what that purpose might be? What would you say is your purpose that you've landed on?
I think in one of the core issues that has driven me for a long time is this notion of battling injustice. And I know many people will say that. I think for me, I actually, in preparation for this podcast, I was thinking about like, why do I feel that? I mean, other
Mhm.
than maybe it's the right ethical thing to do. And I trace it back to my mom, who was she was born in China. She
Mhm.
was one of 6 children. She was born during the war, and so they moved around a lot. And
Mhm.
she would, when my sister and I, she just had 2 girls,
Okay.
were growing up. She would always talk to us about how forgotten she was as a child, how forgotten girls were generally in this very male-dominated society. And I think that she was very angry about that. I will say she's
Mhm.
like this bottomless rage. And I
Mhm.
think so when she felt that injustice on a gender basis, but obviously
Yeah.
it extends on so many other
Sure.
levels around
Mhm.
race and many other aspects of identity. I think
Mhm.
that kind of rage is something that she built into us. And so
Mhm.
it's something when I see it or when my sister sees it, it just comes back, everything that our mom felt. So when I think about
Wow.
purpose in my life now, and over my life, it is when something feels wrong. And in the early childhood field, I'm relatively new to it. I've been
Mhm.
working in this for the last 4.5 years. The way that early childhood educators are compensated, given the critical role that they're playing in young kids' lives, the ways that families struggle to find childcare
Mhm.
when it's essential for their ability to work, particularly women who are, this is kind of maybe back to mom.
Mhm.
Women are, we know so many women, 2.5 million had left the workforce. Almost all the losses in the workforce were women. So women are still bearing this disproportionate share of the costs of this,
Mhm.
raising children.
Yeah.
And that feels wrong to me. And so that the purpose that I'm really like passionate about right now that's driving me is trying to figure out, well, what can we do in
Mhm.
our role in philanthropy, or what can we do as a sector to take this moment when people get how wrong it is and
Yeah.
convert it into something that could actually have some lasting impact.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I could feel one day we'll be in physical presence with each other again, but just through the computer, this sort of very personal connection to how, frankly, sort of historical trauma and implications and impact can have generation to generation, but also how it fuels your current passion that we know that are in the field and that know you see it shows up in your work. So just know that it does, and just so powerfully shared. I appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm curious about, as you shared sort of the experiences that we're having right now within the early childhood sector. You came from, and correct me if I'm wrong, prior to where you are currently, a focus on K through 12. And you've so eloquently shared, even as you feel you've been in only your quote, only 4.5 years in sort of early childhood specifically. Is there something that surprised you or encouraged you or is encouraging you around sort of this K through 12 space and early childhood space that is a promise for us moving forward?
I think that maybe one of the distinctions is that early childhood I think has a lot of things going for it. It's a smaller world, and so it's a more close-knit world. People sort of seem to know each other pretty well. I actually felt like an outsider for the longest time. Just trying to be part of it,
You're part of us. You're part of us. With open arms.
I wanted that. I really, but funders that we work with in early childhood really work together in remarkable ways. I would say much more different. The K-12 world is bigger.
Sure.
So I've certainly worked with a lot of other foundations, but they would kind of reconfigure themselves in different settings all the time.
Right.
Whereas the early childhood, I think, world is kind of worked together pretty, has done it for a long time and has very clear kind of sets of goals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, hopeful. The kind of evidence base and research in early childhood is really strong, and that's hopeful. And it's not, it's been around for a long time. So the work that James Heckman had done and the work that all the brain science research and so forth, I think, is along with this childcare crisis that we're experiencing, all of that's kind of this perfect storm, I think, that is operating in ways that we can perhaps finally get to some of the big changes we're looking for. So there's a lot of reason to be hopeful right now.
There's some momentum right now, right? I mean, I think to your point, what I'm certainly optimistic and excited about from the practice side of the equation is that we're certainly hearing a lot more about early care and education. And it feels that we're able to bring to bear in a different kind of way in terms of policy change, as well as just sort of the conversation at the kitchen table, I think, has changed. Unfortunately, it's taken a pandemic in many ways to bring childcare to the forefront, for example. But fortunately, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox, to your point, around the science of early childhood, the evidence-based of early childhood, at a moment where this movement is, I think, has the potential for exploding on the scene in a way where real transformative change can happen. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. Just a reminder that my conversation with Barbara Chow is a 2-part episode. Look for part 2 coming to your podcast feed soon. Listen and subscribe at childcareaware.org/thetable.
This podcast is hosted by Lynette Fraga, CEO of Childcare Aware of America. This show is produced by Meg Bialis and edited by Viola Lee. You can subscribe to A Seat at the Table, Conversations on Leadership, Equity, and Innovation on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. A Seat at the Table is a production of Childcare Aware of America, the nation's leading voice on childcare. Learn more at childcareaware.org/thetable.